was not a stunt. I'm overheated in my costume and I did pass out. But you know what? I'm a champ and I'm back.
Picture this. The house lights are dimmed, the bass is thumping in your chest, and your favorite icon is giving the performance of a lifetime. They're hitting the high notes, the pyrotechnics are screaming, and then thud, they hit the floor. You cheer, right? You think, wow, what a commitment to the bit. But as the seconds tick by and the house lights flick on, that thrill turns into a collective icy realization. From comedic legends taking a final unintended bow to pop stars pushed to the breaking point, we're diving into the moments where the theatrical became terrifyingly real. Grab your backstage pass, it's about to get heavy. When the script got scored, in the high-stakes world of live entertainment, there is a golden rule. The show must go on. But what happens when the show is exactly what's killing the performer, and the audience is too busy applauding the realism to notice the tragedy unfolding in front of them? This is the ultimate performer's nightmare, a moment of genuine, life-threatening crisis that is mistaken for a brilliant piece of improvisational theater. It is the point where the fourth wall doesn't just crack, it collapses, and the spectators are left cheering for a finale they didn't realize was final. Take the haunting, almost surreal case of Tommy Cooper in 1984. If you weren't there, it's hard to describe the sheer magnitude of Cooper's presence in British comedy. He was a giant of a man, a bumbling magician in a red fez whose entire brand was built on failing spectacularly. His tricks never worked, his timing was intentionally off, and his physical comedy was a masterclass in controlled chaos. So, when he slumped against the curtains during a live broadcast of Live from Her Majesty's, the audience did what they had done for decades. They roared with laughter. They thought the slump was a gag. They thought the way his legs gave out was a bit of physical genius. Even as he sat there, breathless and fading, the producer in the wings was grinning, waiting for the punchline. It took long, agonizing minutes for the stage hands to realize that the bumbling had stopped and a heart had failed. It remains one of the most stark reminders in entertainment history that when your brand is the man who gets it wrong, the audience might not notice when things go truly horribly wrong. Then there are the moments where the script calls for danger, and the danger decides to over-deliver. We often talk about method acting as a way to find emotional truth, but some performers find a physical truth that is far more visceral than they bargained for. Consider the terrifying ordeal of Cunningham, the great Thompsoni, or various stage magicians who have flirted with the line between illusion and injury. In the world of magic, the audience is conditioned to look for the fake. If a magician appears to be choking, we assume there's a key in their mouth. If they fall, we assume there's a trapdoor. This psychological safety net creates a dangerous vacuum where a performer can be in the throes of a medical emergency while the front row is busy trying to figure out the trick. The tragedy of Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow is often cited in film circles, but it echoes the same chilling sentiment of the live stage, the expectation of fiction blinding us to the reality of the moment. While not a collapse in the sense of a fainting spell, the fact that the crew and onlookers believed the scene was simply being played out with incredible intensity is a haunting parallel. When the line between the act and the action becomes blurred, the performer is essentially stranded on an island of their own making. This section of our listicle explores those who were so good at their jobs or whose personas were so intrinsically linked to chaos that their physical breakdown was seen as the prestige of the trick. We look at David Grundman, who famously and fatally miscalculated a stunt involving a giant cactus, a moment that onlookers initially thought was a staged bit of dark comedy. We also examine the faked collapses that conditioned us to be cynical, like the legendary James Brown. The godfather of soul made the collapse and cape routine a staple of his set. He would fall to his knees, seemingly exhausted by the sheer power of the funk, only to be draped in a robe and led off stage before throwing the robe aside and rushing back to the mic. Brown played with the audience's empathy like a violin. He taught us that a collapse could be a climax. Because of performers like him, our first instinct when an artist hits the floor isn't to call 911, it's to wait for the beat to drop. But when there is no beat drop and the performer stays down, the silence that follows is the loudest sound in the theater. It's a transition from "how did they do that" to "is this really happening?" that marks the darkest chapters of stage history. These performers gave everything to their craft, including the moments they could no longer give anything at all. They remind us that the mask of the performer is often a heavy one, and sometimes the audience is the last to know when the person behind it has finally let go. We cheer for the fall because we expect the rise, but in these 22 cases, the rise never came, or if it did, it was behind a curtain that should have stayed open. Talk about a tough act to follow, literally. But sometimes it's not just the schedule, it's the air in the room. Pop stars and the heat of the spotlight. If the old-school legends were battling the expectations of the bit, the modern pop star is battling something far more clinical, the laws of human biology. Today's stadium tours aren't just concerts, they are Olympic-level athletic events disguised as glittery dance parties. When you combine 16-hour days, cross-continental jet lag, and a wardrobe made entirely of non-breathable latex, you aren't just looking at a performer, you're looking at a ticking time bomb in high heels. The modern audience, raised on high-definition perfection, often assumes that a stumble or a sudden slump is just a dramatic transition to a ballad. In reality, it's usually the brain hitting the emergency shut-off switch because the body has run out of fuel. Take Justin Bieber during his Believe tour at London's O2 Arena. The Bieber fever was at a literal all-time high, but the star himself was running cold. In the middle of a high-energy set, Justin started to visibly fade, eventually collapsing backstage after struggling through a song. The fans in the front row, they thought it was a costume change or a particularly moody deep breath moment before the next big hit. It wasn't until his manager, Scooter Braun, walked onto the stage, not to dance, but to explain that Justin was being treated with oxygen, that the screams of excitement turned into gasps of concern. Bieber eventually returned to finish the show, proving that the pressure to be the most hard-working kid in showbiz often overrides the need to, breathe. Then there's the mother monster herself, Lady Gaga. Gaga is a performer who has built an entire career on the art of the macabre. She has bled on stage, theatrically, been rebirthed from eggs and hung from ceilings. So when she began to vomit and eventually collapsed during a performance in Barcelona, the little monsters in the crowd were initially mesmerized. They thought they were witnessing a raw, visceral piece of performance art about the sickness of fame. In truth, Gaga was suffering from severe dehydration and exhaustion, yet she continued the choreography while literally being sick off to the side. It was a masterclass in "the show must go on," but it highlighted a terrifying trend. We have come to expect such extremity from our pop icons that we can't distinguish a medical crisis from a creative choice. The same is this part of the show. Confusion haunted Selena Gomez during her revival era. Selena has been incredibly candid about her battles with lupus, an autoimmune disease that doesn't care if you have a sold-out arena waiting for you. There have been moments on stage where her knees have buckled, and for a split second, the choreography looks like a fall from grace motif. It's a jarring reminder that beneath the layers of Spanx and Swarovski crystals, these are fragile human beings. And we can't talk about modern collapses without mentioning Post Malone. Known for his high-intensity, gravelly performances, Posty has had several moments where he hit the floor so hard it looked like a stunt. During a show in St. Louis, he tripped over an open hole on stage used for lowering equipment. He hit the deck, his body convulsing in pain, clutching his ribs. Because Post Malone's stage presence is often chaotic and rock star-esque, many fans thought he was just feeling the music a little too deeply. It took several minutes of him laying motionless for the music to stop and the medics to rush in. He ended up with bruised ribs, but the fact that he finished the set after a brief timeout and a stiff drink is a testament to the terrifying, superhuman standard we hold these artists to. The heat of the spotlight isn't just a metaphor. For Demi Lovato and Miley Cyrus, The physical toll of being a child star has led to moments of near collapse that were caught on camera and beamed across the world in seconds. For these stars, the collapse isn't just a physical failure, it's a public relations crisis. They have to apologize for being sick, for being tired, for being human. The audience, conditioned by the unbreakable image of the pop star, often views a collapse as a flaw in the product rather than a cry for help from the person. In the world of pop, the air in the room is often sucked out by the vacuum of expectation. We want them to dance for 2 hours, sing live, look flawless, and do it all in 90-degree heat under lights that could cook a steak. When they fall, we don't see a person in pain. We see a glitch in the matrix. We wait for the reboot, but as these 22 stories show, sometimes the system stays down. But while the pop stars are battling the heat and the heels, the rockers are dealing with a whole different kind of timber moment. The rock and roll timber moments. In the world of rock and roll, there is a certain romanticism attached to the idea of leaving it all on the stage. We expect our guitar heroes to be sweaty, gritty, and perpetually on the edge of a breakdown. Because of this, when a rocker actually hits the floor, it's often greeted not with a 911 call, but with a "hell yeah" from the cheap seats. The genre's aesthetic is built on a foundation of simulated rebellion and choreographed chaos of biasuvals, which makes the moments of genuine physical failure almost impossible to spot until the feedback starts to hum and the singer stops moving. No one personified this "is he dead or is he just metal" dilemma better than the late great Meat Loaf. The man was a human hurricane, a performer who treated every song like it was his final stand at the Alamo. Consequently, Meat Loaf collapsed on stage more times than some people changed their oil. The most famous incident occurred in Edmonton in 2016. Midway through "I'd Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That," he simply slid to the floor like a slow-motion demolition. The audience, accustomed to his operatic theatricality and method approach to power ballads, stayed in their seats, waiting for the inevitable triumphant resurrection. When the band stopped playing and the stagehands rushed out, the cheers turned into a heavy, confused silence. It wasn't an act. It was severe dehydration and exhaustion. Meat Loaf had spent decades conditioning us to believe he was invincible, making his actual vulnerability feel like a betrayal of the script. Then there's the god of fuck himself, Marilyn Manson. Manson's entire career is a curated gallery of the grotesque and the unexpected. During a 2013 show in Saskatoon, Manson began to struggle during Beautiful People. He slumped over his monitor, eventually falling flat on his face. Because Manson's shows are often filled with simulated violence, fake blood, and intentional stumbles, the crowd watched with a sort of morbid fascination. Was this a commentary on the fragility of the human condition? Was it a middle finger to the industry? No, it was the flu. Manson had been vomiting all day, and finally, the lights and the volume took their toll. The audience sat there for minutes, staring at a motionless body, waiting for a prestige that wasn't coming. It's the paradox of the shock rocker. When you spend your life pretending to be a monster, no one believes you're a man until you're being carried off on a stretcher. And we can't forget the demon of Kiss, Gene Simmons. During a performance in Brazil, the heat, the 70 pounds of dragon-themed armor, and the legendary platform boots finally caught up with him. Gene had to sit down mid-song, his tongue, arguably the most famous muscle in rock, finally silenced by a dizzy spell. Even as he sat there, looking visibly shaken, fans were snapping photos of what they thought was a rare acoustic-style moment of intimacy from the bassist. In reality, Gene was trying not to pass out in front of thousands of people. The timber moment in rock isn't usually a graceful faint, it's a heavy metallic crash. It's the sound of the ego being overtaken by the biological clock. Similarly, Bret Michaels of Poison provided a terrifying glam rock scare when he collapsed during a 2014 set. Bret is a type 1 diabetic who has always been incredibly disciplined, but the physical demands of "talk dirty to me" under stadium lights can dehydrate even the best of us. When he went down, The fans, many of whom had been following the band since the 80s, initially thought it was a classic rock star pose. The realization that Brett was having a medical emergency didn't hit until the roadies started shouting for a medic. It was a jarring bridge between the forever young fantasy of hair metal and the sobering reality of living with a chronic illness. The rock and roll collapse is unique because it's often fueled by a mix of adrenaline and stubbornness. Performers like Axl Rose or Steven Tyler have had stumbles and falls that looked like part of their swaggering, drunk-on-music personas. When Steven Tyler fell off a stage in South Dakota, he was 61 years old. The crowd initially roared, thinking he was going for a stage dive or a daring stunt. It wasn't until he didn't bounce back up that the gravity of the situation set in. In these moments, the timbre is the sound of a legend hitting the floor, and the audience's delayed reaction is a testament to how well these artists have sold us the lie of immortality. We want them to be superhuman, so we refuse to see the human. We cheer for the fall because we think it's part of the rebellion, failing to realize that the person on the floor is rebelling against their own limits and losing. The classical and TV crisis. While rock stars and pop icons are expected to sweat, there is a different kind of pressure found in the world of high-definition TV and the stiff-collared environment of classical music. In these arenas, the act isn't about chaos, it's about absolute, unwavering composure. The audience expects a level of poise that borders on the statuesque. So, when a TV host or an opera singer suddenly loses their grip on gravity, the shock isn't just about the health scare. It's about the total shattering of a carefully constructed, professional reality. The gold standard for the TV collapse that looked like a skit will forever be Wendy Williams. During her 2017 Halloween special, Wendy was dressed as the Statue of Liberty, complete with a crown and a green sequined dress that looked about as comfortable as a suit of armor. In the middle of her monologue, her eyes began to bulge, her speech slowed to a crawl, and she staggered backward before hitting the deck. Because it was Halloween, and because Wendy is known for her campy, over-the-top personality, the audience didn't scream. They cheered. They thought she was doing a bit about liberty being too tired of the political climate. It wasn't until the camera operator zoomed in on her genuinely panicked expression and the production crew rushed the stage that the "how you doing" vibe turned into "is she okay?" It was a viral moment that proved live TV is a tightrope walk, where the safety net is often invisible until you've already fallen through it. Then we move from the bright lights of a talk show set to the prestigious, hushed atmosphere of the opera house. In the classical world, the physical demands are deceptively high. Imagine wearing a velvet gown weighing 30 pounds, standing under lights that reach 100 degrees, and pushing your lung capacity to its absolute limit for a 3-hour Wagnerian epic. Yannick Nézet-Séguin, a world-renowned conductor, once collapsed mid-performance, illustrating that even the person leading the music isn't immune to the physical strain of the baton. When a conductor goes down, the music doesn't just stop, it unravels. The orchestra members, trained to follow every flick of the wrist, are often the first to see the glitch in the maestro's movements, while the audience in the back rows might assume it's a particularly passionate cue for a crescendo. We see a similar phenomenon with opera singers who literally sing themselves to exhaustion. The act of projecting a voice over a 70-piece orchestra without a microphone requires a level of core strength and breath control that rivals marathon running. There have been numerous accounts of sopranos hitting a high E and then hitting the floor. Because opera is inherently dramatic, filled with tragic deaths, swooning heroines, and poisoned lovers, a singer collapsing is often met with enthusiastic applause. The audience thinks they've just witnessed the most realistic death scene in the history of the Met. They wait for the bow, but when the soprano doesn't rise to collect her roses, the realization sinks in. The tragedy wasn't in the libretto, it was in the biology. The world of live news isn't exempt from this "is this a gag?" confusion either. Look at the case of Heather Tesh, a meteorologist who fainted during a live weather report. As she began to slide off camera, her colleagues and the viewers at home were momentarily paralyzed. In an era of prank culture and viral clips, our first instinct is to look for the hidden camera. This makes it incredibly dangerous for the performer. The more we crave authentic moments, the less we recognize actual reality when it disrupts the broadcast. These classical and TV collapses are particularly jarring because they happen in environments where everything is supposedly under control. In a rock concert, a fall is just another Tuesday. In a TV studio, a fall is a breach of contract with the audience's expectations. These performers are the anchors of our culture. They host our mornings and they lead our symphonies. When the anchor slips, it feels like the world is tilting. It's a reminder that even in the most refined and rehearsed settings, the human factor is the one variable that can never be fully scripted. Whether it's the heat of the costume or the sheer pressure of live airtime, these collapses serve as a stark commercial break from the illusion of perfection to a drop in blood pressure as the person sitting on the sofa at home. The only difference is, when the performer falls, they do it in front of millions of people who are still waiting for the punchline. It's not always a slow fade. Sometimes it's a sudden blackout that leaves the crowd wondering if the encore started early. The legends who bowed out too early. If the pop stars are battling exhaustion and the rockers are fighting gravity, the legends of the stage are often wrestling with time itself. There is a specific heartbreaking dignity in the old guard, those performers who have spent 50, 60, or 70 years under the grease paint and refuse to let a little thing like mortality interrupt their set list. In this final tier of our list, the collapse isn't just a medical blip. It's often the final curtain call for a career that defined an era. These are the performers who lived for the applause, and in some cases, literally died for it, leaving an audience to wonder if they had just witnessed a masterpiece or a tragedy. Take the inimitable Tiny Tim. In the 90s, the ukulele strumming icon was far past his tiptoe through the tulips heyday, but his commitment to the eccentric stayed at 100%. During a performance at a ukulele festival in Massachusetts, Tim suffered a heart attack mid-song. He fell, and because Tiny Tim was a man whose entire existence was a piece of performance art, the crowd stayed hushed, waiting for the quirk. He was revived that time, but only a few months later, at a gala in Minneapolis, it happened again. He was performing his signature hit when he collapsed for the final time. The audience, still charmed by his whimsical persona, initially thought the fall was a dramatic silent film-style flourish. It was only when his wife reached for his hand and found it cold that the music truly stopped. He died doing exactly what he loved, but the act was so convincing that even his final breath was mistaken for a stage direction. Then there is the little sparrow, Edith Piaf. By the end of her life, Piaf was more spirit than flesh, her body ravaged by years of substance abuse and the sheer intensity of her emotional output. She collapsed on stage multiple times in the late 50s and early 60s, most famously at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Piaf didn't just sing, she suffered. Her audience expected her to look like she was on the verge of death. That was the Piaf brand. When she slumped over the microphone, the crowd saw it as the ultimate expression of her chanson réaliste style. They thought she was channeling the pain of the lyrics so deeply that her body couldn't contain it. The line between her legendary suffering artist image and her actual physical decay had become so blurred that her collapses were greeted with standing ovations. We also have to look at Barbara Cook, the Broadway legend, whose voice was as clear as a bell well into her 80s. During a performance at the Tanglewood Jazz Festival, Cook took a tumble that left the audience gasping. In the world of musical theater, a fall is usually a break-a-leg moment, a mishap you laugh off before the next chorus. But when a legend of Cook's stature goes down, the atmosphere in the room shifts from theater to hospital waiting room in a heartbeat. Similarly, the great Dick Clark, while not a performer in the musical sense, became a symbol of this struggle during his later New Year's Rockin' Eve appearances. While he didn't collapse in a heap, his visible struggle to maintain his America's oldest teenager persona after a stroke was a slow-motion collapse that the public watched with a mixture of awe and discomfort. We wanted him to be the same Dick Clark forever, and his refusal to leave the screen was his way of refusing to let the curtain fall. The most visceral example, however, might be Les Harvey of the band Stone the Crows. In 1972, in front of a live audience in Swansea, Harvey touched a microphone that wasn't properly grounded. He was electrocuted instantly. Because it happened in the middle of a high-energy rock set, the fans thought the way his body jerked and fell was a new electrified dance move. They cheered as the life left him, a chilling reminder that the energy we feel from a performer is sometimes literally a dangerous force. These legends remind us that for the true performer, there is no such thing as off. They are on until the very last spark. The audience's tendency to think it's an act isn't just because they're cynical, it's because they have so much faith in the performer's ability to entertain. We believe in the magic so much that we refuse to see the magician's heart stop. These bows were unintended, and the silence that followed them was a tribute to lives spent entirely in the light. The final curtain, call our obsession with the onstage collapse, says as much about us as it does about the performers. We live in a world of high-gloss edits, auto-tune, and rehearsed, candid moments. So when a human body finally says, "no more," in front of thousands, it is the ultimate unvarnished truth. It's the moment the simulation breaks. We want our idols to be superhuman, to sing through the flu, to dance through the dehydration, and to be on even when the world is crashing down. But as these 22 stories prove, the cost of that superhuman status is often a very human breaking point. The next time you're at a show, and the lead singer hits the floor with a little too much realism, take a second before you hoot and holler. Is it a masterclass in method acting, or is it a cry for a Gatorade and a nap? In the grand glittering circus of entertainment, the bravest thing a performer can do isn't always finishing the set. Sometimes it's knowing when to let the curtain drop, because while the show must go on, the performer needs to be around for the encore. Thanks for sticking with us through the highs, the lows, and the literal faceplants. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're going to go sit down before we become number 23. Subscribe to the channel if you love more of these videos.